Okay, welcome back. We're going to carry on with our Pacman project. The couple of things we're going to be doing today is we will be resizing our Pacman because he's a little bit too big. We're going to look at how we can get him to point in the different directions, and we will also be looking at getting him to move around as well as being stopped by the walls. Now, the first thing we want to do is change the size. He's a little bit too big. So we're going to look at the Pac-Man, and the first thing we're going to think about is how much smaller do we want him. There's two ways we can actually do this. We can actually go to the properties of the Pac-Man and change the size of him there, or we can actually change the size of him in our code. Do we need to change him? Do we need to change the size of him throughout the game? No, we don't. So we're not going to do that in the coding. We only want him to change his size once and stay that size. So that we will be doing in the properties. But both options are available. If you guys remember where the properties were? It was actually here. So once we click on the sprite, we should only have one sprite at the moment. We have the properties there. Which one of these would I use to change the size? It would actually be the size. Now, at the moment, he is size 100. So imagine that's 100%. That's the size he would normally be based on what I've created. Everyone would have created their sprites different sizes. So what we're about to do now may not apply to you, or you may have a different number you want to use. So I'm going to think, what proportion do I want to make my Pac-Man compared to what he is now? I'm going to think about 10% of what he is now. So 10% of 100, anyone who doesn't know, is actually 10. So I'm going to change the size to 10. And once I click on enter, he will go to 10% of his current size, which is there. Now, that should work. However, that is tiny. So I'm going to give that another go. Let's try twice the size of him. So I'm going to think double of 10 is 20. So let's try 20. Again, that should work. Might be a little bit small. I'm going to try a little bit bigger. Let's try 30, and he should work there. But obviously, like we mentioned, we can come back and change that if I wanted to. Let's give 25 a go. Yeah, 25 looks good. I can come back and change that if I need to. Not a problem. So I want you guys to go ahead and change the size of your Pac-Man. Once you're done, you hit continue to carry on with the video. Now that we've got the correct size, what we want to do is we want to be able to make my Pac-Man face in different directions. Once he faces a different direction, he would actually use that to move around the screen. We're going to think exactly what do we want to happen in order for my Pac-Man to change his direction. And where would we go to actually code that? So I'm going to head over, if anyone remembers exactly where we're going to go. It will actually be events. So something needs to happen for my Pac-Man to change direction. So these are the three main blocks we can use when the green flag is clicked, which means when my program starts, when the space key is pressed, so when a particular key is pressed, or when this sprite is clicked. Now, considering I want him to constantly change directions throughout the game, the green flag, when clicked, would not be the one. That should only be used if I want something to happen when my program starts. Do I want my player to constantly have to click him to get him to change direction? And considering we have 4 different directions, again, that would not be the most ideal. So we have when space key is pressed. Now, if I click on this drop-down list here, it brings me a list of all the options I have that I can use. So I've got space, up, down, left, right, any key, I've got the alphabet, and I've got the numbers as well. I'm going to actually use the up arrow. Now let's think. When someone clicks on the up arrow, where do we want him to face? We would usually want him to face up. Now, some of you guys may not use the arrow keys. Some of you guys may actually use WASD. That's fine. That is up to you. But I would always recommend if you put the instructions on the side of your project page so that people know exactly what keys to use. Anyway, when my up arrow key is pressed, what do I want him to do? I want him to face upwards. Where would I actually go to grab this piece of code? Would it be motion, looks, or sound? Not sound. Would it be looks? Do I want him to change the way he looks, or do I want him to actually move? I want him to actually move. So I'm going to head over to motion. And let's think which one of these do I actually want him to face upwards. So some of you guys may see this turning anti-clockwise and a certain number of degrees. Let's try that. I'm going to change that to 90 degrees. If anyone remembers, we have a right angle, 90 degrees. Let's give that a go. So as soon as I press my up arrow, he's faced upwards. Does that work? Yes. If I press it again, what's going to happen? Okay, he's continuously rotating around. Is that exactly how I want my game to play? Not really. I'm going to get rid of that block of code. Now, has anyone seen which block of code I would actually use? It would actually be point in direction. And then I need to think about my angles. Again, we're going to be doing a little bit of angles today. Which direction would be up? If anyone remembers, it would actually be 0. Got two options here. I can either click on the 0, or if anyone does find that difficult, what you can actually do is you can actually use this sort of angle slider to get the angle you want. So now I'm going to test that out. I pressed that once, he faced up, that worked. If I keep on pressing up, he remains facing up, so that works. I want you guys to head over and go and code your sprite to do the same. Remember, come back and click continue to continue. Now, what I've done is I've created that one block of code. I've tested it out. It works. Am I happy with it? Yes. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to simply, instead of recoding this 4 times, I will duplicate that. So what I've got is I've got a block of code. I know it works. In this case, it's only 2 lines. It could be 5 lines, 10 lines, 100 lines. It's always good practice to test it out once, see that it works, and then duplicate or copy and paste. So now that I know that works, I'm going to do the right side. Does anyone remember what angle? 90 degrees. Let's do that for the down arrow, and that would be 180 degrees. And we'll also do that for the left arrow, which will be 270 degrees, so 80 plus 90, 270, or as Scratch likes to recognize it, as minus 90. So now that I've coded that, I'm going to test that out. Okay, I'm pressing that up, he's facing up, left, he's facing left, down, he's facing down, and right, he's facing right. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is go ahead, get those blocks of code for me, test it out, make sure it works, and then hit continue and carry on. Now, whenever we are coding, it's always good to try and tidy up our code. So what I'm trying to do is keep everything in line. Now, the next thing I want my Pacman to do is I want him to move around the screen. This one's a little bit tricky. When do I want him to move around the screen? I want him to move around the screen constantly. When the game is played, he's constantly moving. So what I'm going to do is, remember what was one of the things I said, that when do I want him to move? As soon as we start the game, constantly. So where am I going to head for that? I'm going to go to events. Again, when I start the game, and constantly, so I'm going to use a green flag. As soon as my green flag is clicked, I want him to constantly move forward. So we're going to head down to control. Remember last week we looked at iteration. Okay, we used a bit of iteration here. We had 3 types of iteration. I had repeat 10 times, I had repeat until, and I had a forever. Which one do I want to use? Now, ideally, what I would do is I wouldn't use this repeat 10 because I don't want him to do it just a certain number of times. I have the repeat until and I have the forever. Now, what I will use for now is forever. However, we will come back and we will change that to repeat until, and we'll actually get it to repeat until the game is finished. But we need some more codes for that, so we're going to come back and worry about that later on. So, like I said, once my game is started, I want him to constantly move forward. So I've got my green flag is clicked forever. Where am I going to go for the move forward? Let's head over to motion. And I'm going to use the 10 steps. Okay. And let's test that out. So what do I have now? Okay, I have him constantly moving. Now, I've done that. I've tested it out. Does it work? Yes, it does. Obviously, we do have a couple of issues. The first thing I don't like is that he's moving a little bit too fast. So, in order for me to slow that down, what will I change? Does anyone know? I will actually change the number of steps he's moving. So let's change that to 5. Let's get that down to half the speed. Okay, that is much better. However, I still think that's a little bit too fast. So I'm going to try 2. But remember, boys, this is your game and you can do it as you wish. Okay, that might be a little bit too slow. Let's leave it at that for now. Remember, your game, you can do 5, you can do 10, you can do 3 or 4 or 1 even. That is up to you. So what I want you guys to do is go ahead, code that for me, test it out. If you want to change the steps, change the steps. And then come back, click continue, and we'll carry on. Now, the problem we have is that he is going through the walls. I want him to only move forward if he is not touching the wall. Okay, so there's a couple of ways we can code this. Okay, the key thing I said there is I want him to only move forward if he's not touching the wall. So I'm going to head over to control and I'm going to use my forever if. Well, I'm going to use an if statement. Now, what an if statement does is it tells you to only do something if a certain condition is met. So if you misbehave, I may give you an off break. If you work well in class, I may give you a dojo, merit a distinction. If you get a question right, you'll get a tick. These are all different types of if statements, but obviously we're going to use this in our program. So like I said earlier on, if something is met, that's when I want him to move. So that move 2 steps is actually going to head inside that. Okay, so we're only going to move 2 steps if this condition is met. Which condition is met? If he's not touching the wall. Now we're going to improvise with this a little bit. So I'm going to head down to sensing. Okay, and now this is the first time we're actually using any of these sensing lines of code. And I'm going to think about which one of these am I going to use. I'm actually going to use this one. If one color is touching another color, I'm going to drag this over into that block there. And I'm going to say, as long as my color, and I'm going to use a color picker here, the color on my nose. As you guys can see on my screen, he's zoomed in. Do I want this blue? No, I want to head over to the nose. Did you see how that blue just changed color? The ring around where my mouse is, that's the blue I want. And as long as my blue nose is touching my aqua background, I want you to move 10 steps. And that's going to be placed inside the forever. So what we have now is we have a forever if. As long as my blue nose is touching my aqua background, I want you to move 2 steps. Okay, so now as we can see, he's moving. Okay, there was a little issue there, and the reason behind that was because at that angle, my nose was still touching a little bit of the background, which is why he was still going through the wall. Okay, there we go. Again, a little bit still touching the blue background. That's why he's going through it, but that is not a problem. Okay, so that's good. Obviously, there are other ways around that. You can sort of make that a little bit better. That would involve more blocks of code. You need to think about exactly how you would code that. If you feel you can do that, that's great. Go ahead. So I want you guys to go ahead and code that for me, please. So when my green flag is clicked, we want a forever if As long as my blue nose is touching my aqua colored background, we want to move 2 steps. Code that, come back, click continue, and we're going to do one last thing. Now, every time my game starts, he simply just carries on as soon as we left off. So what I want to do, so whenever my green flag is clicked, oh, I gave the first question away there. Whenever we start the game, we want him to go to a certain point and face in a certain direction each time. So I'm going to say, because I gave the answer away, when my green flag is clicked, what do I want him to do? I want him, let's head back to motion, and I want you to go to certain coordinates on the screen, and I want you to point in a certain direction. So whenever my green flag is clicked, he's going to go to these coordinates and point in direction 90. 90, remember, was facing that way. Now, the coordinates might be a little bit tricky. Just so you know, we have our sort of scratch board. The middle point is 0, 0. Okay, so the x-axis is 0, the y-axis is 0. Remember, x is horizontal, y is vertical. At the moment where we have him there, we have him on 112 and 19. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move him over to where I want him to start. And as we can see, my coordinates have changed here. So because we're further, before ahead of the x-axis as being 0, that's a minus. And because we're above, that's positive y. Okay, so because we're horizontally before the 0, that's a minus number, a negative number. And because we're above the y, that's a positive number. So minus 209 and 147. So I'm going to simply come over here, minus 209, and my y-axis was 147. Obviously, remember, you can place yours where you wish. And there we go. Whenever I start, he will start again in the same place. Now, ideally, what we would do is we'd keep everything neat. So I have this block of code with underneath another green flag clicked. Do I need that there? Not really. I can actually move that above there, and I can get rid of that. There we go. So whenever my green flag is clicked, he's going to go to that certain point in a certain direction, and then he will forever switch costumes. He will also run a forever if my nose is touching the blue background. He will move 10 steps, and we have the arrow keys on the way as well. So we can test that out. If it works, that is great. What I want you guys to do, boys, remember to click on share and submit your work. If you shared it last week, obviously you wouldn't need to click share. I watched my other video to see how to submit your work. And ideally, what we should be doing is we should be naming our projects with relevant names. Relevant name for this could be Year 5 Pacman Project. Okay. And there we go. So, boys, remember to share your work with me. Have a good weekend. Please do message me if you do have any issues.